The cry of God is turn back, for why will you die? It is that we have been invited to participate in this promise that was carried on by Jacob, by his sons, through the entire Old Testament and leads up to Jesus himself.
Welcome to the Reach College Podcast with your speaker, Pastor Taylor Gavin.
One of the biggest failures in my life was when I didn't complete the Special Forces training pipeline. So I'd been in that pipeline for about 18 months, doing well. I actually had some of my instructors had said, "Oh man, you're doing great. You're gonna be a great Green Beret someday." And then it all came crashing down in the last course that I was in. And I was pretty close to the end. If I had finished that course, I would have done basically one more and then gone on to my language, and I'd have been done. I'd have had a Green Beret. And I remember it was a huge disappointment at the time when I didn't finish. And I wondered for a long time why God didn't bless that effort. Like, why didn't I get to finish? And I think about, there's always the kind of the intellectual processing of, well, whatever reason, I ended up where I am now because of everything that's happened to me before, and I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. But then when you start to get discontent in a moment about thinking about something that you failed at, you go, but couldn't I have just been successful at that and still gotten to this place and still been who I'm supposed to be today? Well, I read a book about, it was actually a book about the Navy SEALs, but I was reading a book about the Special Forces community in general, and it was talking about some of the, every organization's going to have some bad apples, if you will, or some bad behavior, and it started talking about the nature of the Special Forces community and the fact that because they're so unsupervised, there tends to be they have an easier time kind of maybe doing some things they shouldn't be doing. In Special Forces history, there's been a lot of drug use or things of that nature because they are typically off by themselves in some, foreign country without the rest of the military's eyes kind of on them, right? And so a lot of their ethos and their pride and the things that they talk about are to prevent that, right? When you're away and you have to have a certain amount of integrity so that you don't act in a certain way. But the problems still happen. And as I read that book, one of the things I realized about myself as I began to reflect on my time in the military is that when I was in the military, I did not do a good job of holding the values that I had been raised with, the values that had been instilled in me. What I figured out is, if I look at my military career, I adapted to the moral kind of culture of every unit I was in. If I went to a unit and that unit was big on going to the bars and drinking, then I was big on going to the bars and drinking, right? And I would do essentially whatever kind of the culture around me did. But I was never in any units outside of the regular Army that could have gotten to things like drug use without any kind of repercussion or worse, right? And what I realized is I would always blend in with the group that I was a part of. If I was only around soldiers doing one thing, I would blend in with that. I would behave in that way. I hadn't come to a place in my spiritual growth where I would say, no, there's something I don't believe, something I believe I shouldn't do happening, and I'm going to stand against that or just abstain, right? Just not do it. And I realized that at the point in my spiritual maturity that I failed out of the Green Beret Q course, I would have, if I had ended up in a unit that was struggling with some kind of moral dilemma, some kind of bad behavior behind the scenes or off away from everybody else, I would have blended in. I would have done exactly what they did, probably without a lot of questioning. And I realized that because of my spiritual immaturity, God was actually protecting me from being able to blend in with the people around me. He kept me from because in the regular army, there's still like a lot of drug tests and a lot of supervision, and there's people everywhere, and you're always wearing the uniform, and there's no way to just kind of hide those bad behaviors. So if you're doing it, you're trying really hard to do it. I wasn't going to try that hard, but I was absolutely willing to blend in. And had I made it to that next level, I would have blended in, and it probably, I think to myself, well, I could have finished and been right where I am today. But the more I think about it, the more I think maybe that's not true. Maybe if I had gone on to that next level, I would have done some things that actually prevented me from being where I am today, from being able to become who God was making me to be. And He was actually protecting me from that. So we are in a series called The March of Redemption, right? We're going through Genesis. And why we're going through Genesis matters, right? I've told this story a few times throughout the series, but it's pertinent to today's chapter. 2 years ago in January, a bunch of reachers began Bible reading plans, and you always start in Genesis, and they were coming up to me and they were saying, I'm in Genesis and I'm just not getting anything. I just don't understand why these stories matter. What is the Bible trying to tell me? And after I got over the shock and terror of those statements, I decided, okay, we need as a group to go through Genesis and explore why these stories are important, why the Bible has them, why the gospel is in them. And so we began to talk about this idea of the March of Redemption, this idea that God made a promise at the end of chapter 3 when the fall happens that He was going to accomplish redemption. And that redemption over and over and over again should have been stopped, defeated, destroyed. The flood should have killed it. The Tower of Babel should have ruined it. Everything should have gotten in its way. And yet, one generation after another, God progressed the promise of redemption forward. And so we begin looking in this. And here's the thing. The reason I bring all this up today is because if you've read Genesis chapter 36 recently, you were probably bored out of your skull. Okay? Genesis chapter 36 is essentially like 5 different genealogies, and most of them had the exact same names, and none of the names come up again. I mean, most of the names don't come up again. So you're reading through it, and if you've ever done your Bible plan, this is one of those mornings you're just like, oh my goodness, why is this in here? And so what we're going to do is, instead of skipping this passage in our March of Redemption, we're going to look at it. Now, I will alleviate some of the pain. We're not going to read every single verse in this chapter, right? But we're going to move through it, and we're going to read the verses that will help us understand what's happening and why this chapter is important at all. What you're going to see today, you're going to see a couple things. One of them is that there's a promise being fulfilled to Abraham. Abraham was told, you'll be the father of many nations, right? And we think of Israel, and we're like, yeah, Israel. But that's only one nation. And so over and over again, starting with Ishmael, Abraham is constantly becoming the father of multiple nations as multiple of his descendants produced nations. Well, today we're going to see that Esau, one of his descendants, is going to produce a nation. Okay, we're going to see that Esau, he's the firstborn of of Isaac. He's the firstborn of Isaac, and he's going to produce the nation of Edom. Right? Now, the other big reason that we have to talk about this is every single descendant of Abraham could have a claim on the promise made to Abraham that redemption would come through that descendant. Right? We're told that Abraham would be a father of many nations, and that there would be a single seed, an individual seed that would provide redemption for all the nations. Okay, and that's a huge blessing. To be the descendant that actually gets to carry that forward. But we know that blessing of that seed is given to Israel. But along the way, starting with Ishmael and now all the way to Edom, the question for the Israelites and for the nation surrounding is, well, what about that descendant? Why doesn't that descendant get to carry the seed? Why don't they get to have the blessing of redemption come through them? Okay, and so we're going to, the author almost has to pause as he's about to start the Joseph narratives, and he's going to talk about the favored sons, right, the nation of Israel. He has to stop and say, first of all, let's deal with this other descendant that's not favored, that's not going to carry the blessing forward. He has to deal with this first, and this is going to explain something. How God blesses Esau, blesses Edom, and seems to have actually a warm, tender view of Edom, and yet it is said for the rest of the Bible that in comparison to Jacob, Esau was hated by God. And that verse throws us for a loop because it seems to be that he hates with a passionate anger Esau, but that's not the case. It's that anybody who didn't get to carry on the blessing of redemption, anyone who didn't get to lead in their own heritage all the way to Jesus, could have been said to have been hated. The language is actually an idiom, right? The idiom means to prefer. That's why Jesus says, hate your father and mother. It is prefer me over even your own parents. And so it's not to say that God had a boiling anger towards Esau. It is to say that he preferred Jacob for the promise of redemption to move through his line. And in comparison to that amazing blessing, everyone else could be said to have been hated by God because they missed out on carrying that redemption forward. So the first thing we're going to see is Esau's family ties. Look at chapter 36, starting in just verse 1. Now, these are the records of the generations of Esau, that is Edom. Okay, so the first thing I want you to see right here, Esau and Edom, there is almost a pun going on here. If you don't remember the story, Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of lentils, a bowl of red stew. Okay, and there's a pun on Esau's name, which is kind of like to be red, for this stew that he sells his birthright out for, and that same pun is applied to Edom. So right off the bat, what the author is doing is reminding you, we're going to talk about the son who sold his birthright. We're going to talk about the one who's going to miss out on this promise because he sold it for this red stew. That's the tone right as we begin. Look at verse 2. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan, Ada, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Oholibamah, the daughter of Anna, the granddaughter of Zibeon the Hivite. Also Basemath, Ishmael's daughter, the sister of Nebaioth. Ada bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemath gave birth to Reuel. And Oholibamah gave birth to Jeush, Jalam, and Korah. These are the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Oholibamah's got to be like one of the funniest names in the Bible. But so the first thing you're going to see here is the Canaanite wives. Okay, now we need to talk again about this idea of intermarriage. Okay, there is this prohibition against intermarrying, and the Israelites understood that the current audience, right? They're wandering around the wilderness, they're reading these stories, and they understand this prohibition. Why is there a prohibition against intermarriage? It's not a race problem. It's a religion problem. Okay, it was one thing for a people group to become Jewish and then marry Jewish men, right? Ruth is not an Israelite by birth, and yet she's in the genealogy of Jesus himself. Okay, so the problem is not their heritage, it's their religion. Ruth gives up her foreign gods to worship the God of Israel. The problem with these Canaanite wives, and the reason that they were told over and over again not to marry them, is because very often they married them and they became Canaanites instead of the Canaanite wives becoming Israelites. See, the problem is one of direction. When they married, they got sucked into false gods and idol worship. And that's why there's a prohibition. Now, immediately we're reminded that Esau has a bunch of Canaanite wives. And again, this is something that caused his mother a lot of consternation earlier. She favored her younger son because of, almost entirely because of these women that were causing so much problems to her and the family because they were fully Canaanite. They didn't live like the people God had chosen, right? And so we're reminded again, and now I want you to see this prohibition doesn't end in the Old Testament. We're told in the New Testament not to be unequally yoked. That's the same thing. It has nothing to do with race or heritage. It has everything to do with religion, with faith. You are not supposed to marry non-believers because they will pull you into and away from your faith. They'll pull you into the world. And so that prohibition actually is revived in the New Testament, but it's clarified. This is about faith. It's about your religion. You have to marry somebody that speaks the same language as you in your faith language, in the heart. Okay? And then as one last side note, I'm going to talk about polygamy because this has come up recently. Okay. The Old Testament does not tell us things. The way they wrote was with action and consequence. Okay? What the Bible does is that in the Old Testament, the author doesn't say polygamy is bad. What he does is he says, look at this guy. He married multiple people and things went poorly. Okay? That is the point. That is how he drew the connection. Look at this guy. He drank a lot and things went poorly. Right? And that's how they understood that actions had consequences and that bad actions had bad consequences and good actions had good consequences. Okay, now here's the other problem. That has been established. The author has told us in the earliest chapters, as we saw the first generations of evil in man, that polygamy is bad. It's always been pointed to that way. At this point in the story, the author is not concerned with that. So we have Jacob, who has multiple wives, and we have Esau, who has multiple wives. And the author is not commenting on that. He's not saying, well, but it was okay for Jacob because hypocrisy, I guess. What is the excuse for that? There's not. It's not that the author is saying, well, it's okay now, or it's okay as long as you're on the right side. The author has already established it's wrong, and these are not perfect people. That's actually something that leads credibility to the Bible in general, is that nobody except for Jesus is ever pointed to as doing really well. Constantly, it's like, this guy sucked, but God loved him too, right? And that's pretty much the whole Old Testament, okay? So keep in mind that the existence of men who had multiple wives is not a justification for polygamy. As a matter of fact, earlier in the book, we're told that's bad, okay? All right, so we're seeing now the Canaanite wives. We've been reminded that this man has married outside. Now look at verse 6. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all his household, and his livestock, and all his cattle, and all his property, which he had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to another land away from his brother Jacob. For their possessions had become too great for them to live together, and the land where they resided could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau lived in the hill country of Seir. Esau is Edom. Okay. So the first thing we see is a complete vacating of the land and therefore the birthright to Isaac. All right, it's already been established, but this is it coming into fruition, right? It's now being lived out. Now, this is a picture of Esau packing up lock, stock, and barrel, everything he's got, and taking it out of the land. He is fully giving way to the fact that the birthright, the land, has been promised to Jacob. Okay, so he is leaving. Now, why does he leave? And this is key. He doesn't leave because there's a war or an argument. He doesn't leave angry. He leaves because there's too much blessing from God. Okay, that's really tricky. Because all of a sudden it's like, okay, God blessed him so much that he separates himself from the people that God is going to send his promise through. This is, in fact, a very real danger of our lives even today. That we would be so blessed and so comfortable, we would forget God. This is why in the Proverbs, we're told, give me neither riches nor poverty. Because if I have given too much, I might say, who is the Lord? But if I'm given too little, I might steal and profane the Lord. We are told to be content in this middle ground. The question is this: are these blessings from God a good thing or a bad thing? They're good if they cause you to focus on and worship the Lord. I mean, would it been like feasibly? Is it possible that Esau could have said, you know what, I've got too much, and I need to do something about that in order to stay close to God? That's possible. He could have done that. If those blessings had caused him to worship God more, then they're inherently good. But if those blessings cause you to focus on something other than God, then they can only be said to have been bad. And it's in the outcome. It's really, what do you do with them? All good things come from the Lord. But it's about whether or not you let your heart be carried away by the things God has given you. I've given you guys this analogy several times. Somebody you love comes up to you and says, hey, I care about you so much, and I want to give you this watch. It's a really special watch to me. I've had it my whole life. It matters to me. I want you to have it to know that I love you. And you took the watch and went, I've always wanted this watch. Now we don't have to be friends anymore. Thanks. Bye. Be like, what? You missed the point of the watch. The watch was a token of love from that person. It wasn't about the watch, right? That is how we're supposed to view blessings. And in verse 8, we get the Seir theme. Okay, so I want you to see this. The author is making a very specific point. Seir is a location that Esau goes to become the nation of Edom. It's a hilly country to the southeast of Israel, and it's where he moves to. But that theme continues. There is essentially, it is to say that Seir, Esau, and Edom are interchangeable words. Okay? And why does that matter? Because Seir was not just a location, it was a people group, right? It was descendants of Seir, right? In the location that was named after their namesake, Seir. Now, what the author is saying is, Edom and Esau, which we've already established are the same, there's a pun there about birthright, they have moved into Seir and they're going to become the people of Seir, even though that's not the people of Israel, the people of God, the people in the promised land. All right, so the author tells you in these first 8 verses, he establishes a connection with the first verse and the last verse to say, what we're going to talk about in this chapter is how Esau became Edom and how Edom became Seir and how it's all the same thing because they blended right in. There's a family tie here, and it makes Esau cease to be different than the world. He actually cuts his family ties from the family of God. He leaves instead of tying himself. See, we're told to hate our father and mother and follow Jesus, when that means cutting ties from your family to follow the Lord. In this case, he's cutting ties from his family to walk away from the Lord. He's separating. We have a spiritual family, and we're not supposed to let our physical blessings cut us off from that spiritual family. I wanted to get my Green Beret because it would have been a visible, tangible symbol of pride. It would have been something that for the rest of my life I could have pointed to and said, look, this is how quality I am. This is how good I am. This physical thing represents how great I can be. Paul literally says, listen, I had everything. I physically had all the blessings to say, look at how great I am, and I consider it all to be loss or dung in the sight of what God is doing for me, in the sight of what God is accomplishing in me. See, Paul understood it wasn't about blending in with the world's pride. It was about understanding what God actually has for us. Look at verse 9. Verse 9 says, these then are the records of the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites, in the hill country of Seir. Okay, now this is the next section of verses is essentially about the nation becoming a nation and its pride, its prestige, its standing in the world. Verses 11 through 14 show a nation forming, and verses 15 through 19 show the prestige of the chiefs of the nation. Essentially, this entire portion is to say, look at how great a nation Edom became, Esau became in the hill country of Seir. It's a nation through 3 wives. Now, this is interesting. We're not going to dissect this out of the passage. You can definitely look this up, but you're just going to have to take my word for it because it's kind of confusing. The 3 wives have 5 sons and 10 grandsons. That's 15. And we're told that the number we're looking for to a nation to be produced is 12. Okay? So it's interesting because Oholibama is the wife that comes from Ser. She's a descendant of Ser. So she's actually the only one that we focus on for the first generation of sons. So Oholibama, it basically means only her sons matter. Okay, so the other 2 wives, they have 2 sons, but we can take them out of the equation right now. That's 13. Okay, so we have 13, and then if you read in verse 12 says, Timnah was a concubine, and Esau's son Eliphaz, and she was a concubine of Esau's son Eliphaz, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. These are the sons of Esau's wives, Adah. Okay, so here's why that matters. That is to say, the Amalekites, which is another nation in the land, they came from a concubine. There's 2 things being said there. One, that son doesn't count either, or that grandson doesn't count, so we can take him out of the equation, getting us finally to the number 12, and also huge slap in the face to the Amalekites. Okay? Keep in mind, like this record, right, would have been something that the other nations around Israel would have seen. And so on their way to face off with the Amalekites, on their way to retake the promised land, they're saying, you have even less claim than the other people in this land because you were born of a prostitute. You have no bearing. You have no heritage. You're an illegitimate descendant. Okay, so right away, huge slap at the Amalekites, right? This would have been infuriating if you were in the nation of the Amalekites. And so that slap takes out 1 more grandson and gets us to 12. So what the author is trying to do, he takes the Ser connection, takes out a couple of sons, takes out a grandson with a huge insult, and says, boom, a nation. 12 is the number for the nation, right? And so once again, we're being oriented. We saw this in the last chapter. We got to 12 with the sons of Jacob. We're told, look, here's the nation of Israel. And then we go, now pause. We'll come back to the nation of Israel. We're going to talk about the favored sons, but let's just talk about this other nation right here. And so we're given another 12. And we're told this is the nation of Esau, a nation and a proud one at that. And I want you to see that this nation is actually given a blessing, a very clear blessing by God. In Deuteronomy 23:7, it says, you shall not loathe an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not loathe an Egyptian because you were strangers in this land. See, the comment about the Egyptians has to do with how you treat a sojourner, how you treat somebody moving through the land. But the Edomites are given special status. They're not strangers. They're not enemies. They're brothers. God had a special place in his heart for the people that went through Esau. He truly did bless them. The problem becomes that their link to the world is too strong. They connected too much. See, the Bible tells us we cannot serve 2 masters. The Bible tells us that friendship with the world is enmity to God. If you tie yourself into the things of the world will pull you away from God. Friendship with the world is how we lose our identity. Now, one of the things I want to remind you of in chapter 35, we had a circumcision ploy. Some of the sons of Jacob said to a people group that they planned on killing, they said, well, we can't be a part of your nation because you're not circumcised. And it's very interesting the way they say it, because they say, if you'll just get circumcised, we can join you. And they actually make a mockery out of what it means to be circumcised. Now, they were lying in the first place, and they used circumcision, something holy, as a way to commit an act of murder, which is why they fall out of the running to be blessed by Jacob as the ones that carry on the promise, right? That goes to Judah. But the point is that viewpoint on circumcision shows the backwards effect. It's not, if you'll get circumcised, I can join you. It's, hey, if you want to join me, you got to do some things. That's the message of circumcision, right? The idea is not, hey, if you'll come to church and say the Apostles' Creed, I'll go out to the bars with you this weekend. It's no, hey, if you'll stop going to the bars, you can come join me and you can come here and learn about Jesus. You can join what I'm doing, right? It's not me going to join you. And so we see that that's the point of this family identity. It's to bring others into your identity, not to become a part of their identity. So look at we're going to do this. We're going to read verse 20 and then verse 24 and 25. Verse 20 says, "These are the sons of Ser, the Horite, the inhabitants of the land, Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, and Anna." 24 says, "And these are the sons of Zibeon, Ea, and Anna. He is the Anna who found the hot springs in the wilderness when he was pasturing the donkeys of his father Zibeon. And these are the children of Anna, Dishon, Oholibama, the daughter of Anna." Okay, so the first thing I want to orient you to is the name Oholibama. That is the same one. That is telling us this is her heritage. She comes from the land of Ser, right? The other thing is this random portion about finding water and having donkeys, okay? Again, this is one of those things where you're having your quiet time and you're reading through chapter 36 because your plan tells you have to, and you're chugging away and you're like, what is this verse about donkeys? And then you move on. But this is intentional. This is to show you that Oholibama doesn't just come from Ser, she comes from a rich family in Ser. They found water in the hill country, which is to say they found a successful place to be established, and they had a herd of donkeys, which is a reference to their wealth, right? This is a prominent member of a family. This is the importance, right? This is not somebody that Esau fell in love with and said, "Hey, you got to come to church with me. You got to become like me, be a part of my family." This is him marrying into a family of Ser and getting a bunch of wealth and prestige that came with it. He's blending in to them, not the other way around. Okay, this is the exact reason that this provision against marrying outside is a problem. So this entire section is about the sons of Ser, I call it the Horite detour. Okay, and here's why. The first two genealogies are about Edom and about Esau. And then the third genealogy is about the people who lived in Ser, the Horites that were there before Edom. Now we're told later that the Edomites run them out. They take over the land. But the point the author's making is they didn't run them out and then act like children of Abraham. They ran them out, married in with their women, and then became just like them. They fit right into the same genealogies. It's basically one more step away from God. They just blend right in. Nothing, they're not causing anyone to turn towards the Lord. Every step they're taking is causing them to turn away from the Lord. It's a reverse conquest. They literally take over the land and then settle right down and become this people group. That is the opposite of what God has commanded his people to do, which is to take this land. They become the people of Ser. This is why Esau is hated, why he's not set apart like Jacob to receive the promise. Now, and what I want you to see this is kind of like almost, there's already Gentiles, right? There's already non the children of Abraham, right? But this almost is the author pointing to almost the birth of the Gentiles. The author is saying there's this new people group forming that God cares about, but they're not children of Abraham, at least not yet. There's going to be a carve out, a provision given to this group. And now the first thing that happens is we have to see that there's actually a break with Israel because of this. So in Amos 1, 11 and 12, it says this. "This is what the Lord says, for 3 offenses of Edom and for 4. I will not revoke its punishment, because he has pursued his brother with the sword and stifled his compassion. His anger also tore continually, and he maintained his fury forever." Amos comes right out of the gate swinging at Edom and says, "You guys were supposed to be our brothers, but you fought us, you terrorized us, you took joy in our downfall." And by the way, that's just one verse that I picked out. If you skim through the minor prophets, there is a dozen verses saying, "Edom, you were supposed to be right there with us, and God is coming for you now because you took joy, you took part in the destruction of Israel. You joined the wrong team. You've been cast out." So there's this break because Edom gave its identity to the world to receive what? Physical blessings. They wanted what they could see, what they could touch, what they could smell, instead of the Lord. They lost their identity. Now, the next portion is about the family's power. It's going to be about the portion of kings. So we're going to read verse 31, verse 35, and verse 38. Verse 31 says, "Now these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the sons of Israel." 35 says, "Then Husham died, and Hadad, the son of Bedad, who defeated Midian in the field of Moab, became king in his place, and the name of the city was Avith." And then 38 says, "Then Shaul died, and Baal-Hanan, the son of Achbor, became king in his place." Okay, here's the reason we read these verses, okay? The first thing I want you to see is that Israel has been promised kings, and not only has it been promised kings, but it's been promised a king. There's a royal promise to Israel. And yet, while Israel was slaves and now is a wandering nation in the wilderness, Edom went out and got kings. They established themselves. They became a people group that had a king. See, the Bible tells us that one of the things that causes us to slip, to doubt, is that the wicked prosper. Because while we're wandering through the wilderness, while we are living in tents, while we are sojourners in the world around us, the wicked are living it up. They're having a great time. They've got all the riches, the money, the power, the wealth, or the power, the fame. They can do whatever. And meanwhile, we're struggling to make ends meet, and people hate us. But the point is that the wicked may prosper in the life that we can see, but there will be a day when they do not prosper ever again, and where God's people will never cease to prosper. See, Edom, they went out and did it the world's way. They got everything they wanted. They just said, we want kings? Let's have some kings. Want to be royal and mighty and powerful? They just did everything the world had already established works. They did not go the path of faith. Israel, wandering around the desert, literally is following a pillar of cloud, of fire and smoke. They're just walking through the wilderness going like, well, today more manna came down from heaven, so I guess we live another day. Meanwhile, Edom is living it up. But the promise of a permanent king, that comes through Israel. That comes through God's people who will flourish someday forever. The righteous walk by faith. They have a focus on the unseen things of this world, not on the seen or the temporary. The next thing we're going to see is a family home. All of this conversation, this entire chapter, leads to one practical result, one real question. Where is your home? Where are you making your home? Where do you intend your permanent residence to be? See, how you seek to blend in reveals that. Who you seek to blend in with reveals where your home is. We're going to read the last verses that lead into chapter 37, starting in verse 40. Now these are the names of the chiefs that descended from Esau according to their families and their localities by their names: Chief Timnah, Chief Alva, Chief Jetheth, Chief Oholibama, Chief Elah, Chief Pinon, Chief Kenaz, Chief Teman, Chief Mibzar, Chief Magdiel, and Chief Iram. These are the chiefs of Edom, that is, Esau, the father of the Edomites, according to their settlements in the land of their possession. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had lived as a stranger in the land of Canaan. Jacob is exactly where God has been trying to get him the whole time. He is living in the land, and he's living by faith because he doesn't even really own the land yet. But he's living where God has set him in the promised land as a representation of a permanent land where God will place him. And we're told while that's happening, the Edomites, they have chiefs and kings, they have locations. See, that whole last genealogy has more to do with land than it does people. It's a lot of the same names, but the idea behind it is that they've already accomplished rulership of a land. Let me ask you something. Who are the people of Edom today? They're gone. The people of Edom get destroyed. Now, there are people groups in that area, but the Edomites didn't make it because their kingdom, their rulership, it was temporary. Jacob was a stranger in the promised land. Edom became a great nation, and yet it wouldn't last. See, verse 1 of chapter 37 really is the gospel. Jacob is in the land, and the gospel is still marching forward. It's going to make it to the next generation. Now, I want you to see the crazy part of this. Biblically, we are Edom. We are the people that aren't under Abraham directly by heritage, but instead only by faith. We are the people who were hostile to God, even though God was using Israel to make a way for us. And the gospel is the good news that God made a way for Edom. He made a way for us to once again be reunited, to be grafted back in, to be close to Him. I want to read you a couple verses. The first one is from Amos. I started in Amos 1 where he attacks the Edomites, but look at this. In Amos chapter 9, it says, "On that day I will raise up the fallen shelter of David and wall up its gaps. I will also raise up its ruins and rebuild it as in the days of old, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the mountains who are called by my name, declares the Lord who does this." The remnant of Edom. Amos starts in judgment and he ends with a claim about the redemption of a remnant of people who didn't follow the world, who didn't do what the world was asking, but instead believed on God. And I want you to see what becomes of that promise. In Acts 15, starting verse 16, it says this: "After these things I will return, and I will rebuild the fallen tabernacle of David, and I will rebuild its ruins, and I will restore it, so that the rest of mankind may seek the Lord, and all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says the Lord, who makes these things known from long ago." It's the exact same promise. Literally, the writer of Acts is quoting Amos, except he changes a word. He changes the word Edom to all the Gentiles, to all mankind. The promise of the Edomites is a promise to the children of Abraham by faith. Those who choose brotherhood with the promise of God, brotherhood with Jesus, who is to say Israel. Jesus is the perfect fulfillment of the line of Judah, and those who are brothers with him by faith, not just by heritage, or not including heritage, that's the Gentiles. That's us. We are the heirs of the promise to Edom. This is what it says in Galatians chapter 3. "Just as Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, therefore recognize that it is those who are of faith who are the sons of Abraham. The scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, 'All the nations will be blessed in you.' So then, those who are of faith are blessed with Abraham the believer. For all who are of works of the law are under a curse, for it is written, 'Cursed is everyone who does not abide by all the things written in the book of the law to do them.' Now, that no one is justified by the law before God is evident, for the righteous one will live by faith. However, the law is not of faith. On the contrary, the person who performs them will live by them. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, 'Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree,' in order that in Christ Jesus the blessing of Abraham would come to the Gentiles, so that we would receive the promise of the Spirit through faith." The gospel is available to the children of Edom. That's us. It was made available to all who would come in faith to become brothers, to become children of Abraham, brothers of Christ, brothers and sisters of Christ, that we would, by faith, not be linked to the world and lose our identity, but instead be the remnant that God redeems, not abandoned or left out. The cry of God is, turn back, for why will you die? It is that we have been invited to participate in this promise that was carried on by Jacob, by his sons, through the entire Old Testament and leads up to Jesus himself. And the only way that we participate in that is not by reading this as a book filled with rules that we have to follow, but instead a book that tells us what our identity is in. It's in a person. It's not in the law. It's in the person of Jesus Christ who saves us. That is the message. Don't link yourself to the world. Don't lose your identity in the things you can see. Ask yourself this question this week. Where am I making my home? That is the most important question you can possibly ask.
Hey guys, this is Philip Jackson, pastor to young adults at Evergreen Baptist Church. I want to invite you to come to Reach. We meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Evergreen Church in South Tulsa, just east of Mingo on 111th Street. The mission of Reach Tulsa is to cultivate a young adult community that's defined by real transformation and the sincere pursuit of a godly life through training in biblical disciplines, personal development, and intentionally transitioning into independence as mature members of the body of Christ. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe to our content. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Reach Young Adult Ministry is a part of Evergreen Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information and additional lessons, please visit our website, evergreenbc.org.